Marcus Wellington had everything money could buy. His luxury car cut through the desert highway like a silver bullet, heading toward his newest business venture in Phoenix. The air conditioning hummed softly as he spoke into his Bluetooth headset, closing another $1 million deal. At 45, he owned 3 companies, 2 mansions, and a yacht that most people could only dream of. The desert stretched endlessly on both sides of the highway. Marcus barely noticed the vast landscape of sand and cacti. His mind was focused on numbers, profit margins, and the next acquisition. Success had become his only language, and he spoke it fluently. Then his phone rang. It was his assistant Sarah calling about the Phoenix meeting. "Mr. Wellington, I'm afraid there's been a change. The meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning. The clients had a family emergency." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He hated delays. Time was money, and wasted time was wasted money. He had driven 4 hours into the middle of nowhere for nothing. "Fine," he said curtly. "Book me a room at the best hotel in Phoenix. I'll stay overnight." As he ended the call, Marcus noticed his fuel gauge was running low. The desert highway stretched for miles without any sign of civilization. He had been so focused on his phone calls that he hadn't paid attention to basic needs like gas. A small gas station appeared like a mirage in the distance. It looked old and weathered, the kind of place that probably hadn't been updated since the 1980s. Marcus pulled in reluctantly. The place looked deserted except for an elderly attendant who shuffled out to help. "Fill it up with premium," Marcus said, not bothering to get out of his air-conditioned car. The old man nodded and began pumping gas. Marcus drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel. This was exactly the kind of delay that drove him crazy. Every minute here was a minute he could be making money or planning his next move. As the tank filled, Marcus noticed something strange in the distance. Beyond the gas station, about a quarter mile into the desert, something was moving. It looked like a person, but that couldn't be right. Nobody would be walking in this heat. The temperature outside was over 110 degrees. The sun beat down mercilessly on the sand, creating shimmering heat waves that distorted everything in the distance. Marcus squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The old attendant finished pumping gas and approached Marcus's window. "That'll be $68, he said. Marcus handed him his credit card, but his eyes remained fixed on the distant figure. "Is that a person out there?" he asked. The attendant followed his gaze and shrugged. "Could be. Sometimes folks get lost out here. Desert can be tricky, especially for people who don't know it. Shouldn't we call someone? Police or something?" "Phone lines are down," the old man replied. "Storm knocked them out yesterday. Won't be fixed till tomorrow, maybe longer." Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. Something wasn't right about this situation. The figure in the distance seemed to be moving slowly, almost stumbling. If someone was really lost in this heat, they could die. He thought about driving away. It wasn't his problem. He had important business to attend to, money to make, deals to close. Getting involved in someone else's troubles wasn't part of his plan, but something made him hesitate. Maybe it was the way the figure moved so slowly and desperately. Maybe it was the complete isolation of this place, miles from any help. Or maybe it was a voice in the back of his mind that sounded suspiciously like his late mother, reminding him that money wasn't everything. Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He put his car in park and stepped out into the blazing heat. The sun hit him like a physical blow, and sweat immediately began forming on his forehead. "I'm going to check on whoever that is," he told the attendant. The old man looked surprised. "You sure about that, mister?" "Desert's dangerous, even for a short walk." Marcus was already walking toward his trunk. He pulled out a bottle of water he kept for emergencies and started walking toward the distant figure. Each step in the sand was more difficult than the last. His expensive shoes weren't designed for desert hiking, and his business suit felt like a furnace. As he got closer, Marcus could see that it wasn't just one person. There were multiple figures huddled together under a small patch of shade created by a large boulder. His heart began racing as he realized the magnitude of what he was seeing. It was a young man, probably in his early 20s, sitting in the sand with 3 small children clustered around him. The man was clearly exhausted, his dark skin glistening with sweat despite being in shade. The children looked to be between 2 and 5 years old, and they were all crying softly. Marcus's business instincts kicked in immediately. This was a crisis situation that required quick thinking and decisive action. He approached carefully, not wanting to frighten them. "Hey there," He called out when he was about 20 feet away. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The young man looked up with desperate, grateful eyes. He tried to stand but stumbled and fell back into the sand. "Please," he said in accented English. "The children, they need water." Marcus rushed forward and knelt beside them. Up close, he could see how dire their situation really was. All four people were severely dehydrated. Their lips were cracked, their skin was flushed from heat exposure, and the children were barely conscious. "How long have you been out here?" Marcus asked, offering his water bottle to the young man. 2 days, the man whispered, taking small sips and then immediately giving the bottle to the smallest child. "Maybe longer." I lost track. Marcus felt his world shift. 2 days in this heat without adequate water or shelter could be fatal. These people were dying, and he had stumbled upon them completely by accident. If he hadn't needed gas, if his meeting hadn't been postponed, if he had taken a different route, the young man introduced himself as David. The 3 children were his siblings: Maria, age 5, Carlos, age 3, and baby Rosa, who was barely 2 years old. David explained that they had been traveling north, looking for work and safety, when their ride abandoned them in the middle of the night. "We walked toward the lights," David said weakly, pointing toward the distant gas station. "But the desert, it's bigger than it looks." Marcus realized that these 4 people had been walking for days, trying to reach the gas station that was visible in the distance. What looked like a short walk was actually miles of treacherous desert terrain. The immediate priority was getting them to safety and medical attention. Marcus knew that every minute counted in a situation like this. Marcus didn't hesitate. He scooped up little Rosa, the youngest child, while David struggled to his feet with Marcus's help. Maria and Carlos clung to David's worn shirt, their small faces streaked with tears and dust. The walk back to the gas station felt like the longest quarter-mile of Marcus's life. Each step was a battle against the heat, the sand, and the growing weight of responsibility he felt for these 4 lives. His expensive business suit was soaked with sweat, and his leather shoes were filling with sand. But none of that mattered anymore. Rosa was barely conscious in his arms, her tiny body burning with fever from heat exhaustion. Marcus found himself talking to her in a gentle voice he didn't recognize as his own. "It's going to be okay, little one," he whispered. "We're almost there. You're safe now." When they finally reached the gas station, the elderly attendant's eyes widened with shock. "Good Lord," he muttered. "Where did you find them?" "About a quarter mile out," Marcus panted, still carrying Rosa. "They've been lost for 2 days. We need to get them medical help immediately." The attendant, who introduced himself as Henry, quickly brought out chairs and more water. His weathered face showed decades of desert wisdom as he assessed the situation. "Nearest hospital is 40 miles north," Henry said grimly. "With the phone lines down, we can't call an ambulance. These folks need help now, not in an hour." Marcus felt the weight of the situation crushing down on him. In his business world, every problem had a solution if you threw enough money at it. But money couldn't make a hospital appear in the middle of the desert. "What do we do?" Marcus asked, surprising himself with the word "we." When had this become his problem to solve? Henry was already moving with purpose. "I've got a first aid kit and some supplies in the back. Worked as a medic in Vietnam long time ago. Seen heat exhaustion before." For the next hour, Marcus watched as Henry worked methodically to stabilize David and the children. He mixed electrolyte solutions from powder he kept behind the counter, applied cool wet cloths to their foreheads, and gradually got fluids into their systems. Marcus found himself following Henry's instructions without question, holding children while Henry checked their pulse and temperature, fetching supplies, and even helping to gently clean the sand and grime from their faces and hands. David slowly became more alert as his body rehydrated. He kept apologizing in broken English, thanking Marcus repeatedly for saving them. Marcus waved away the thanks, feeling uncomfortable with the gratitude. He wasn't used to being seen as a hero. In his world, he was known for being ruthless, not compassionate. As the children recovered enough to speak, Marcus learned more of their story. David explained that they had been living with their grandmother in a small village in Mexico. When she died 6 months ago, they had nowhere else to go. David, barely 21 himself, had taken on the responsibility of caring for his 3 younger siblings. "I promised our mother before she died that I would keep them safe," David said quietly. "She made me swear that I would never let them be separated. The family had sold everything they owned to pay for passage north, hoping to find work and safety. But the people they paid had abandoned them in the desert, taking their money and leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and one small bottle of water. Marcus listened to their story with growing emotion. He thought about his own childhood, growing up with every advantage money could provide: private schools, college tuition paid in full, a trust fund that guaranteed he'd never want for anything. The contrast with David's situation was stark and humbling. As the sun began to set, Henry announced that the family was stable enough to travel. "They need proper medical attention," he said, "but they're out of immediate danger." Marcus knew what he had to do. "I'll drive them to the hospital," he said without hesitation. Henry nodded approvingly. "Good man. I'll stay here and keep an eye on things." Loading 4 additional people into his luxury sedan required some creativity. Marcus put down the back seats and created a makeshift bed with towels and his spare jacket. David insisted on holding baby Rosa, while Maria and Carlos curled up on either side of him. The 40-mile drive to the hospital passed in relative quiet. Marcus found himself glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, checking on his passengers. David kept Rosa hydrated with small sips of water, while the older children dozed fitfully. About halfway to the hospital, Carlos woke up crying. He was frightened and confused, calling out for his grandmother in Spanish. David tried to comfort him, but the boy was inconsolable. Marcus surprised himself by pulling over and getting out of the car. He walked around to the back door and knelt down next to Carlos. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "It's okay. We're going to get you somewhere safe." Carlos looked at him with huge, scared eyes. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, scrolling through pictures until he found one of his nephews playing at his brother's house last Christmas. "Look," Marcus said, showing Carlos the picture. "These are my nephews. They like cars and trucks just like you probably do." Carlos stopped crying and stared at the phone screen with fascination. He had probably never seen technology like this before. Marcus showed him a few more pictures, including some of his cars and his house. "When you get better," Marcus found himself saying, "maybe you can come see the cars in person. Would you like that?" Carlos nodded shyly, and for the first time since Marcus had found them, the little boy smiled. The moment hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child had been through unimaginable hardship, had nearly died in the desert, and yet a simple act of kindness could bring joy to his face. It made Marcus realize how long it had been since he had made anyone smile like that. When they arrived at the hospital, Marcus carried Rosa while David walked with the other 2 children. The emergency room staff immediately took charge, whisking the family away for evaluation and treatment. Marcus found himself alone in the waiting room, still wearing his sand-covered business suit, trying to process what had just happened to him. A few hours ago, his biggest concern had been a delayed business meeting. Now he was sitting in a hospital, waiting to hear about 4 people who had somehow become the most important thing in his world. A nurse approached him after about an hour. "Are you the gentleman who brought in the family?" Marcus nodded. "How are they doing?" "They're going to be fine," she said with a smile. "You got them here just in time. Another few hours in that heat and, well, let's just say you saved their lives." The words hit Marcus harder than any business success ever had. He had saved their lives, not with money or connections or power, but with simple human compassion and quick action. "The family is asking for you," the nurse continued. "They'd like to thank you properly." As Marcus walked toward their room, he realized that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet understand. The successful businessman who had driven into the desert that morning was not the same person walking down this hospital corridor. The hospital room was small but clean, with 2 beds pushed together to accommodate the family. David sat on one bed with baby Rosa in his arms, while Maria and Carlos shared the other bed, looking much better after receiving IV fluids and medical attention. When Marcus walked in, all 3 children's faces lit up with recognition and joy. Carlos immediately reached out his arms, wanting to be held by the man who had shown him pictures on the phone. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he lifted the little boy. "Señor Marcus," Maria said excitedly, practicing the name David had taught her. Her smile was radiant, completely different from the scared, dehydrated child he had found in the desert just hours earlier. David stood up carefully, still weak but determined to show proper respect and gratitude. "Mr. Wellington," he began formally, "I do not have words in English to express what you have done for us. You are an angel sent by God." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the religious reference and the hero worship in David's eyes. "I just did what anyone would do," he said quietly. David shook his head firmly. "No, sir. We saw many cars pass on the highway before yours. We waved and called for help, but no one stopped. You are different." The social worker assigned to their case, Mrs. Martinez, entered the room just then with a clipboard full of paperwork. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had obviously seen many difficult situations. "Mr. Wellington," she said, extending her hand, "I understand you're the Good Samaritan who brought this family in. I need to speak with you about their situation." Marcus followed her into the hallway, leaving David with the children. Mrs. Martinez's expression became more serious once they were alone. "First, let me say that you absolutely saved their lives," she began. "The doctors confirmed they were in critical condition when you brought them in. But now we have a complicated situation." Marcus waited for her to continue, dreading what he might hear. "David and the children are undocumented," Mrs. Martinez explained. "Normally I would have to contact immigration services, but given the circumstances of how you found them, there might be other options." "What kind of options?" Marcus asked. "Well, David is clearly devoted to those children and they're not going anywhere without him. The little ones have obviously bonded with him as their primary caregiver. If we can establish some kind of temporary protective custody situation while we work on their legal status." Marcus found himself asking a question that surprised even him. "What would that involve?" Mrs. Martinez studied his face carefully. "It would require someone willing to serve as their sponsor. Someone with resources and standing in the community who could vouch for them, and provide temporary housing while we navigate the legal system." The implication hung in the air between them. Marcus felt a familiar sensation in his chest, the same feeling he got when he was about to make a major business decision. But this was different. This wasn't about profit margins or market shares. This was about 4 human lives. "How long would this process take?" he asked. "Could be months, maybe longer. The system moves slowly, especially for cases involving children. And there's no guarantee of the outcome." Marcus walked to the window and stared out at the desert landscape. Somewhere out there was the spot where he had found David and the children, a place where his life had changed forever in the span of a few hours. "What happens to them if I don't help?" he asked without turning around. Mrs. Martinez's voice was gentle but honest. "David would likely be processed for deportation. The children, they might end up in foster care, possibly separated from each other while the system tries to figure out their legal status." The thought of those 3 children being separated from David and from each other hit Marcus like a physical blow. He remembered David's words about promising their mother that they would never be separated. When Marcus returned to the hospital room, he found David teaching Carlos how to count to 10 in English, while Maria helped feed baby Rosa with a bottle. It was a scene of such ordinary family love that it took his breath away. "David," Marcus said, sitting down in the chair next to the bed, "we need to talk about what happens next." David's face immediately became anxious. "Are we in trouble? Will they send us away?" "Not if I can help it," Marcus said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "How would you feel about staying with me for a while? Just temporarily while we work on making your situation legal." David stared at him in shock. "You would do this? You would let strangers live in your house?" Marcus looked around the room at the 3 children, who were watching him with curious eyes. They weren't strangers anymore. Somehow, in the space of a single day, they had become something he couldn't quite define but couldn't ignore. "You're not strangers," Marcus said simply. "You're family that I just hadn't met yet." The paperwork took 3 days to complete. During that time, Marcus stayed at a hotel near the hospital and visited the family every day. He brought them books, toys, and clothes from the hospital gift shop. But more importantly, he spent time with them. He discovered that Maria was incredibly bright and curious, asking endless questions about everything around her. Carlos was shy but observant, and he had developed a special attachment to Marcus. Baby Rosa was just beginning to say her first words, and she seemed to light up whenever Marcus walked into the room. David amazed Marcus with his resilience and maturity. Despite being only 21 years old, he had shouldered enormous responsibility with grace and determination. He was teaching himself English from a children's book Marcus had brought, practicing pronunciation with the same dedication that Marcus applied to closing business deals. On the third day, Dr. Patricia Jenkins, the attending physician, cleared the family for discharge. "They're in remarkably good health considering what they've been through," she told Marcus. "David is an excellent caregiver. Those children are lucky to have him." As they prepared to leave the hospital, Marcus realized he was nervous. His penthouse apartment in downtown Phoenix was beautiful but sterile. It had been designed for entertaining business clients, not for housing a family with 3 young children. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Wellington?" Mrs. Martinez asked one final time as she handed him the temporary custody paperwork. "This is a big commitment. Your life is going to change significantly." Marcus looked at David, who was carrying Rosa while holding Carlos's hand. Maria walked beside them, chattering excitedly about seeing Marcus's house. For the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was doing something that mattered more than money. "I'm sure," he said with conviction, "we're going to figure this out together." The drive to his apartment was filled with wonder as the children pressed their faces to the windows, marveling at the tall buildings and busy streets of downtown Phoenix. Marcus found himself seeing his city through their eyes, noticing things he had long taken for granted. When they arrived at his building, the doorman, James, looked surprised to see Marcus with a family in tow. But his years of professional discretion kicked in, and he simply smiled and welcomed them warmly. The elevator ride to the 23rd floor was an adventure in itself for the children. They had never been so high up in a building, and Carlos held tightly to Marcus's hand as they rose through the floors. When the elevator doors opened to reveal Marcus's apartment, David stood frozen in the doorway. The space was enormous by any standard, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the desert and mountains beyond. "This is where you live?" David asked in amazement. Marcus suddenly saw his home the way they must see it, not as a status symbol or a business asset, but as an impossibly luxurious space that could house dozens of families like theirs. "This is where we live now," Marcus corrected gently. "All of us." As the children ran excitedly from room to room, marveling at everything they saw, Marcus realized that his empty, pristine apartment was about to become something it had never been before. A real home. The first week was chaos. Marcus had never lived with children before, and his perfectly organized life was turned upside down almost immediately. His expensive white furniture became a canvas for Rosa's finger paintings. His state-of-the-art sound system was repurposed for Carlos's dinosaur roars and Maria's impromptu singing performances. But something magical was happening too. For the first time in years, Marcus's apartment felt alive. The sound of children's laughter echoed through rooms that had previously known only the quiet hum of air conditioning and the occasional business phone call. David proved to be an incredible help, taking care of the children's daily needs while Marcus was at work. But Marcus found himself leaving the office earlier each day, eager to return home to the warm chaos that had replaced his cold perfection. "Mr. Marcus," Carlos would shout when the elevator doors opened, running full speed into Marcus's arms. It was the best part of every day. Maria had appointed herself as Marcus's Spanish teacher, patiently correcting his pronunciation as he attempted to learn basic words and phrases. "No, no, Señor Marcus," she would giggle. "It's buenos dias, not buenos dias." Rosa, now fully recovered from their desert ordeal, was a tiny tornado of energy. She had claimed Marcus's home office as her personal playground, and he found himself conducting business calls while stepping over toy blocks and coloring books. The changes weren't just physical. Marcus discovered that his priorities were shifting in ways he hadn't expected. When his assistant Sarah called about a last-minute business trip to New York, Marcus found himself saying no for the first time in his career. "But Mr. Wellington," Sarah protested, "this is the Morrison account. It could be worth millions." "Reschedule it," Marcus said firmly. "Maria has a school enrollment appointment tomorrow, and I promised to be there." The silence on the phone was telling. In his previous life, Marcus would have moved mountains to secure $1 million account. Now a 5-year-old school appointment was more important. Getting the children enrolled in school became Marcus's new mission. Maria was bright and eager to learn, but she spoke very little English. Carlos was shy and had never been in a formal educational setting. Finding the right schools that could accommodate their needs and help them transition became a full-time project. Dr. Sarah Coleman, the principal at Sunrise Elementary, was initially skeptical when Marcus called to inquire about enrollment. "Mr. Wellington, our school has a waiting list, and we typically require extensive documentation for enrollment," she said professionally. Marcus explained their situation, carefully avoiding some of the more complicated legal details. "These children have been through trauma, but they're resilient and eager to learn. They just need a chance." Something in his voice must have convinced her to meet with them. When Marcus arrived at the school with David and the children, Dr. Coleman was impressed by what she saw. Maria answered her simple questions in careful English, her face serious with concentration. Carlos stayed close to David, but eventually warmed up enough to show Dr. Coleman his favorite book. Rosa charmed everyone by clapping her hands and saying, "Pretty," when she saw the colorful playground. "I'll be honest," Dr. Coleman said after meeting with them. "This is unusual for us, but these children clearly have a strong support system, and that's what matters most." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude that surprised him. "Thank you for giving them a chance." "Actually," Dr. Coleman said with a smile, "I think they might be giving us a chance too. Maria's enthusiasm for learning is infectious. We could use more students like her." The legal side of their situation was more complex. Marcus had hired the best immigration attorney in Phoenix, Margaret Foster, who had been working on their case with determination and creativity. "The asylum process is complicated," she explained during one of their regular meetings, "but David's youth and his role as caregiver to his siblings works in our favor. The fact that you're providing stable housing and support strengthens their case considerably." Marcus was learning to navigate systems he had never encountered before. Immigration courts, social services, educational advocacy. It was a completely different world from corporate boardrooms and financial planning, but he was also discovering skills he didn't know he possessed. Patience, for one. When Rosa had a meltdown in the grocery store because she couldn't have candy for breakfast, Marcus found himself calmly talking her through her emotions instead of losing his temper. Compassion was another new skill. When Carlos had nightmares about being lost in the desert, Marcus would sit with him for hours, reading stories and singing half-remembered lullabies his own mother had sung to him decades ago. The children were changing him, but Marcus was changing them too. Maria's English was improving rapidly with daily practice and excellent teachers. Carlos was gaining confidence and had even made his first friend at preschool. Rosa was thriving in the stability and love that surrounded her. David was perhaps the biggest surprise of all. Marcus had initially seen him as another child to care for, but as weeks turned into months, he realized that David was becoming a true partner in raising the children. His natural wisdom and deep love for his siblings made him an invaluable ally. "You have good instincts with children," David told Marcus one evening as they cleaned up after dinner. "Did you have children before?" Marcus shook his head. "No, I was always too focused on business to think about family." David smiled knowingly. Maybe business was just practice for this. The observation hit Marcus more deeply than he expected. Perhaps his years of managing teams, solving problems, and making quick decisions had been preparing him for something more important than quarterly profits. 3 months after finding them in the desert, Marcus faced his first major test as a parent. Maria came home from school in tears, her usually bright smile replaced by deep sadness. "What happened, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, kneeling down to her level. Between sobs, Maria explained that some children at school had been mean to her, calling her names and saying she didn't belong there. Marcus felt a rage building in his chest that was unlike anything he had ever experienced in the business world. His first instinct was to march into that school and demand justice, but David's calm presence reminded him that this situation required wisdom, not just power. "What do you think we should do?" Marcus asked Maria, surprising himself by seeking the opinion of a 5-year-old. "I want to show them I'm nice," Maria said simply. "Maybe they just don't know me yet." Marcus was amazed by her emotional intelligence and resilience. This child, who had survived unimaginable hardship, was choosing kindness over anger. It was a lesson that struck him to his core. The next day, Marcus worked with Maria to prepare a presentation about Mexico for her class, complete with pictures, traditional food, and stories about their culture. Instead of fighting prejudice with anger, they chose to combat ignorance with education and love. The presentation was a huge success. Maria's teacher later called to tell Marcus that his daughter had started a trend, with other children wanting to share stories about their own family backgrounds. Your daughter, Marcus thought as he hung up the phone. When had that happened? When had Maria stopped being the little girl he had rescued and become his daughter? That night, as Marcus tucked all three children into their beds, he realized that somewhere along the way he had stopped thinking about this arrangement as temporary. These weren't house guests anymore. They were his family and he was theirs. The successful businessman who had driven into the desert 6 months ago was gone. In his place was a man who measured success by bedtime stories read, homework helped with, and hugs received. And for the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly wealthy. The immigration hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in February, almost a year after Marcus had found the family in the desert. Attorney Margaret Foster had prepared them as thoroughly as possible, but everyone knew that the outcome was far from guaranteed. Marcus sat in the courtroom wearing his best suit, not for business this time, but to show respect for the legal process that would determine his family's future. David sat beside him, equally formal in a suit Marcus had bought for him. The children stayed home with a babysitter, too young to understand the gravity of what was happening. Immigration Judge Patricia Hendricks had a reputation for being fair, but strict. She had seen thousands of cases over her 20-year career, and was known for her ability to separate genuine asylum claims from fraudulent ones. Mr. Morales, she addressed David formally. Please tell me about your journey to this country. David stood and spoke clearly, his English now much improved after months of classes Marcus had arranged. He told their story with dignity and honesty, the death of their grandmother, the dangerous journey north, being abandoned in the desert, and Marcus finding them just in time. Marcus felt his heart racing as David described those terrible days in the desert. Even now, the memory of finding them dehydrated and near death filled him with emotion. And Mr. Wellington, Judge Hendricks turned to Marcus, you have provided sponsorship and housing for this family for nearly a year. That's a significant commitment for someone who was, by all accounts, a stranger to them. Marcus stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, I was a stranger to them, but they weren't strangers to me. Not after I saw how David cared for those children despite impossible circumstances. Not after I witnessed their courage and resilience. Family isn't just about blood relationships. Sometimes it's about choice, commitment, and love. The judge studied Marcus carefully. You understand that if I grant asylum in this case, you're likely to have ongoing responsibilities to this family for years to come. Yes, Your Honor, and I welcome those responsibilities. These children have taught me what really matters in life. They've made me a better person. After hearing testimony from social workers, teachers, and character witnesses, Judge Hendricks retired to her chambers to make her decision. The wait felt endless. When she returned, her expression was unreadable. This case has required careful consideration of multiple factors, she began. The applicants clearly fled dangerous circumstances and have established strong community ties here. Marcus held his breath. Furthermore, the judge continued, the extraordinary level of support provided by Mr. Wellington demonstrates that this family has the resources and stability necessary to become contributing members of our society. I hereby grant asylum to David Morales and his 3 siblings. The courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Margaret Foster squeezed Marcus's hand, and David sat in stunned silence before tears of joy began streaming down his face. But the legal victory was just the beginning of new challenges. With their status now secure, Marcus faced decisions about the future that he had been avoiding. His penthouse apartment, while luxurious, wasn't ideal for a growing family. The children needed space to play, preferably with a yard. They needed to be in a neighborhood with good schools and other families. Marcus found himself doing something he had never imagined, shopping for a house with children's needs in mind. Not investment potential or status symbols, but playground proximity and school districts. The house they finally chose was in a quiet neighborhood 20 minutes from downtown. It had 4 bedrooms, a large backyard, and was walking distance to an excellent elementary school. It was half the size of Marcus's penthouse, but somehow felt much more spacious. Are you sure about this, sir? His real estate agent asked. This neighborhood is nice, but it's quite different from what you're used to. Marcus looked out at the backyard where he could already picture Carlos playing soccer and Maria reading under the large oak tree. It's perfect, he said with certainty. Moving day was an adventure that perfectly captured their new life together. Maria directed the movers with the authority of a tiny general. telling them exactly where each box belonged. Carlos followed Marcus around, asking if he could help carry things. Rosa mostly got in everyone's way while charming them with her toddler babble. David proved invaluable, coordinating between the Spanish-speaking movers and the English-speaking supervisors. Marcus was amazed at how naturally David had grown into his role as both brother and co-parent. The first night in their new house, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through the rooms, still filled with boxes but already feeling like home. He found David in the kitchen, also unable to sleep. "Big day," David said simply. "The biggest," Marcus agreed. "Are you happy with the house?" David nodded. "The children love it already. Carlos is excited about the backyard. Maria counted 3 other little girls on our street. And Rosa," he smiled. "Rosa thinks everywhere is perfect as long as we're all together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 2 men who had become family through extraordinary circumstances. "David," Marcus said eventually, "I need to ask you something important. What do you want to do with your life? Now that your status is secure, you have choices." David had been taking English classes and had shown remarkable aptitude for learning. Marcus had been thinking about educational opportunities that would help David build a career while still being present for his siblings. "I want to help other families like ours," David said without hesitation. "Maybe study social work or become a translator. There are so many people who need help navigating the systems we've learned." Marcus felt a surge of pride. Even after everything they had been through, David's first thought was about helping others. "I think that's an excellent idea. What would you need to make that happen?" "College, I think. But I don't know how." "We'll figure it out together," Marcus assured him. "We always do." The conversation reminded Marcus of how much his own priorities had changed. A year ago, his biggest concern had been maximizing profits and expanding his business empire. Now his energy was focused on creating opportunities for his chosen family. Marcus had also been forced to examine his relationship with money. His wealth, which had once been an end in itself, had become a tool for creating security and opportunities for people he loved. It was a profound shift in perspective that affected every aspect of his life. His business associates had noticed the changes too. Marcus was still successful, but he was no longer ruthless. He turned down deals that required unethical practices. He implemented family-friendly policies at his companies. He started a scholarship fund for immigrant children. "You've gone soft," one of his longtime business partners complained during a meeting. The old Marcus would have closed this deal regardless of the environmental concerns. "The old Marcus was making money," Marcus replied calmly. "The new Marcus is building something that matters." Not everyone understood his transformation, but Marcus didn't need their approval anymore. He had found something more valuable than their respect. He had found purpose. The children were thriving in their new environment. Maria had become one of the top students in her 2nd grade class and had been selected for the Gifted and Talented program. Her teacher regularly called to report on her exceptional progress and natural leadership abilities. Carlos had overcome his initial shyness and was now a confident, happy 4-year-old with a best friend next door and a passion for building elaborate structures with blocks. His preschool teacher said he had a natural aptitude for engineering and construction. Rosa, now 3, was a bundle of energy and creativity. She spoke in sentences that mixed English and Spanish, creating her own unique language that somehow everyone in the family understood perfectly. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in David himself. The scared, desperate young man Marcus had found in the desert had grown into a confident, capable adult who was thriving in college classes while still being a devoted big brother. As spring arrived and they celebrated their first full year as a family, Marcus realized that his rescue of 4 people in the desert had actually been his own salvation. They had saved him just as much as he had saved them. The successful but empty life he had been living was gone, replaced by something richer and more meaningful than he had ever imagined possible. 5 years had passed since that life-changing day in the desert. Marcus stood in the backyard of their home watching Carlos, now 9 years old, teach a group of neighborhood children how to build a treehouse. Maria, 11 and incredibly mature for her age, was tutoring younger kids in both English and Spanish at the kitchen table. 8-year-old Rosa was creating an elaborate chalk masterpiece on the driveway, narrating an epic story about princesses and dragons. David, now 26, had just graduated from Arizona State University with a degree in social work. He had been hired by the same organization that had helped them navigate the legal system years ago. His dream of helping other immigrant families was becoming reality. Marcus had never imagined that success could look like this, not measured in dollars or deals closed, but in children's laughter, family dinners, and the quiet satisfaction of watching people you love achieve their dreams. The doorbell rang, interrupting his peaceful observation. Marcus answered it to find Mrs. Martinez, the social worker who had helped them in those early days at the hospital. She was older now, graying at the temples, but her warm smile was exactly the same. "Mrs. Martinez!" Marcus exclaimed, genuinely delighted to see her. "What brings you here?" "I have some news I wanted to share in person," she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "Do you remember that case we worked on together? The family you sponsored?" Marcus laughed. "I think I remember them. They're around here somewhere." Mrs. Martinez handed him an official-looking document. "David's citizenship ceremony is scheduled for next month. All 4 of them will officially become American citizens." Marcus felt tears spring to his eyes as he read the notice. After 5 years of paperwork, interviews, and waiting, the final step in their journey was about to be completed. "David," Marcus called out, "you need to see this." David emerged from the house where he had been helping Maria with her algebra homework. When he saw Mrs. Martinez, his face broke into a huge grin. "Did you tell him?" Mrs. Martinez asked, nodding toward the document in Marcus's hands. David's eyes widened as he read the notice. "We're really going to be citizens?" "All of you," Mrs. Martinez confirmed. "The ceremony is on July 4th. Seemed appropriate somehow." The children gathered around, sensing that something important was happening. When David explained what the document meant, Rosa clapped her hands and shouted, "We're Americans, we're really Americans." Marcus felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter in the desert was reaching its formal conclusion, even though the real journey, the one that had transformed them all into a family, had been complete for years. The citizenship ceremony took place in a large convention center downtown, filled with hundreds of people from dozens of countries who were all taking this final step together. Marcus sat in the audience, overwhelmed with pride as he watched David, Maria, Carlos, and Rosa raise their right hands and take the oath of citizenship. When it was over, they celebrated at Rosa's favorite restaurant, a small Mexican place that reminded them of their grandmother's cooking. The children wore tiny American flag pins on their shirts, and David carried his citizenship certificate like the treasure it was. "So what now?" Marcus asked as they shared a huge platter of nachos. "You're officially Americans. Any regrets about that long journey from Mexico?" David looked around the table at his siblings, all of them healthy, happy, and secure in ways that would have been impossible to imagine in their old life. "No regrets," he said firmly. "Every step of that journey led us to this family. Even the hard parts, even getting lost in the desert. If we hadn't been there that day, we never would have met you." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "I've never thought about it that way. You're grateful for getting lost?" "I'm grateful for being found," David replied. "By you, but also by ourselves. We found out who we really are and who we want to be." That evening, as they were getting ready for bed, Maria approached Marcus with a serious expression on her face. "Dad," she said. They had all started calling him Dad years ago, though it still made his heart skip a beat every time. "I want to ask you something important." "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "Tomorrow is Saturday, and I want to go back to the desert, to the place where you found us. I want to see it again." Marcus was surprised by the request. "Why do you want to go back there? It might bring up difficult memories." Maria shook her head. "Not difficult memories. Important ones. I want to remember where our story started. And I want to thank that place for bringing us together." The next morning, the whole family piled into Marcus's SUV, much more practical than the luxury sedan he had been driving 5 years ago, and made the familiar drive into the desert. The gas station where Henry worked was still there, though Henry had retired and moved to be near his grandchildren. They drove past the station to the spot where Marcus had first seen them, a small area marked by the same large boulder that had provided their meager shade all those years ago. The desert looked exactly the same, vast, harsh, and unforgiving. "It's hard to believe anyone could survive out here," David said quietly, looking out at the endless expanse of sand and scrub brush. "But we did survive," Carlos pointed out with the wisdom of a 9-year-old. "And look what happened because we survived." They spent an hour at the site, each family member processing the significance of the place in their own way. Rosa, who had been too young to remember the desert experience clearly, was fascinated by the story of their rescue. Carlos wanted to understand exactly how they had gotten lost and how Marcus had found them. Maria stood quietly by the boulder for a long time, and when she finally spoke, her words surprised everyone. "This place changed all of us," she said thoughtfully. "Not just us kids, but you too, Dad. You weren't really happy before you found us, were you?" Marcus considered her observation carefully. She was right, of course. He had been successful but empty, wealthy but lonely, accomplished but unfulfilled. "You're very wise, Maria," he said finally. "I thought I was rescuing you, but maybe we all rescued each other." As they drove home, Marcus reflected on how completely his life had changed direction that day in the desert. The businessman who had been focused solely on profit and power was gone, replaced by a man whose greatest achievement was the love and trust of 3 children who had started as strangers. His companies were still successful, but now they operated with a sense of social responsibility that reflected his changed values. He had established a foundation to help immigrant families, funded scholarships for underprivileged children, and created job training programs in underserved communities. But the most important change wasn't in his business practices or his charitable giving. It was in his heart. He had learned to love unconditionally, to put others' needs before his own, and to find joy in simple moments rather than grand achievements. That night, as he tucked each child into bed, Marcus marveled at the completeness of his transformation. Carlos showed him a drawing he had made of their family standing together in front of their house, all of them smiling under a bright yellow sun. "This is us," Carlos explained unnecessarily. "We're happy." "Yes, we are," Marcus agreed, kissing his forehead. "We really are." Rosa, drowsy but still chattering, told him about her plans to become a doctor so she could help people the way the hospital had helped them. "I want to save families like you saved us, Daddy." Maria, always thoughtful, asked him if he ever missed his old life. "Do you wish things had stayed the same?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "You know what I miss most about my old life?" he asked. Maria shook her head, waiting for his answer. "Nothing," he said with a smile. "I don't miss anything about it at all." As he turned off the lights and headed to his own room, Marcus passed David's bedroom. His door was open, and he was sitting at his desk, working on a case file from his new job. "How's the new job going?" Marcus asked, leaning against the doorframe. David looked up with tired but satisfied eyes. "Today I helped a family get connected with legal services. Tomorrow I'm translating at a court hearing for a mother trying to get asylum for her children. Sounds like important work." "It is," David said with conviction. "Every family I help, I think about us, about how lucky we were that you stopped that day." Marcus shook his head. "I was the lucky one, David. You gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." "What's that?" "A family, a purpose, a reason to be proud of the man I am instead of just the money I make." 5 years after finding 4 strangers dying in the desert, Marcus Wellington had everything he had never known he wanted. The empty penthouse had been replaced by a house full of love and laughter. The lonely businessman had become a devoted father. The man who measured success only in dollars had learned to value it in hugs, bedtime stories, and the simple joy of being needed by people he loved. As he fell asleep that night, Marcus smiled, thinking about tomorrow. Carlos had a soccer game. Maria had a science fair project to finish. Rosa wanted to plant flowers in the garden. David was bringing home a colleague for dinner. It was going to be a perfectly ordinary day in their perfectly extraordinary life together. And Marcus couldn't wait.